Welcome to the Elevate Podcast, a resource designed to take your ministry vision in your staff and deepen your impact for the gospel. I'm today's host. I'm Brian Coates. I serve as the executive pastor at our Brentwood Campus, and with me today is Todd Bishop and Linc Taylor, and we're talking about how we create safe ministry spaces. So, Todd, why don't you start off and introduce yourself?
My name's Todd Bishop, and I've served on the staff at Brentwood Baptist for about 10 and a half years. I am the associate executive pastor of our North region, and part of that role is looking over our safety and security protocols, working with our police, and those kind of things.
Yeah. And Linc?
Yeah, Linc Taylor. I get to serve here as our next gen and family minister. I've been here about 19 years, and so get to kind of supervise and oversee a lot of these spaces that we're trying to create safe and secure spaces for all our preschool ministries, children ministries, student ministries, anything like that. Yeah.
You know, a few years ago, as the terrible stories came out more about church abuse and the need to create safe spaces within the church were just consistently in the news, it seems like we took a hard look at our policies and procedures to make sure that we were doing all that we could to ensure the safety of our people, particularly our most vulnerable populations, our kids, our special needs ministry, but really all of our folks. Thankfully, up to that point, we had a lot of good procedures, but we were able to take a really deep dive and see what we needed to improve on. Mm-hmm. So just in your mind, Todd, I'll ask you first, why is looking at these safety procedures so important for us to do as ministers on the staff?
You know, I think about the last 12 years or so, we've seen, where safety and security was sort of like just something you didn't think about a whole lot. We didn't, we maybe had a police officer help us direct traffic. But, in the last 10 to 12 years, we've just seen this increase in, violence. We've been seeing a lot of mental health issues, and we've just seen a lot of different things that we've seen in our world and our culture. And we said, are we prepared for those kind of things to happen here? And so I think we took a really deep dive into, okay, how can we make a church to be a sanctuary, where I can come in and feel safe, so I can hear the good news of the gospel. And so we've really spent a lot of time working with medical professionals. We've talked to police officers, and we've even talked to fire departments and say, what are some of those areas? And when we talk about safety and security, it's a lot of things. It's not just, hey, do we have police officers and an active shooter training protocols, but we're also like, what do we do in a fire emergency? What happens if there's tornadoes? We're in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're in tornado season right now. And so, what does that look like when you've got hundreds of children in the building, and how do we keep them safe? And so Linc and I have worked together for years on, even those kind of protocols. Mm-hmm. But, we've just also seen mental illness increase. Yeah. And so how do we address that? Our vision statement, mission statement is engaging the whole person with the whole gospel. And so how do we address that, keeping people safe, but also being a light to them, when in their darkest hour? And so how do we address those kind of things? And so that has really led to a lot of work in the background, Linc, with all our next gen team and our safety folks that help us every Sunday across our campuses and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, well, same type of thing. Looking more specifically with our next gen family ministries, how have we been able to look at this and create that safe space for our people?
Yeah, our overall concern and intent is to keep kids safe, keep families safe, parents, leadership, workers, staff as a church. So that's our goal. But the collision of that is how do we do that best but still do ministry? Yeah. And so we've continued to look at that and learn best of how we create spaces, but also ministry is thriving. But we move, kids and preschool children, students, leaders, families, and through all kinds of ministry spaces, from groups to different settings, to open spaces, to retreats, to mission trips. And so how do you navigate that landscape? We still have a calling in our lives to come alongside families and be the church within those ministry spaces. But It has been challenging at times, but our intent is, what was not going to stop is we've got to create some policies. We've got to have a training involved. We've got to do our background checks. We need to do reference checks. We need to do interviews. How do we ramp all that up and create a standard and across our campuses? And it has been an adjustment, but I think we have now settled in, not settled in to where we feel safe, but settled into we can do this. We can do ministry and also have some high standards for our people.
Well, and hearing you both talk, I think, a lot of times you hear about safety and security or child safety policies, and unless you're an executive pastor, you don't get super excited about that. But I think the key in all of this and what you both said is that we're being proactive. Probably about 10, 15 years ago, we were more reactive. Things happen, okay, now we'll create a policy. We realize that's not the day that we live in, so we have to take a look at these emergency response procedures. How do we prepare to deal with a tornado, with a person that comes in that maybe is not quite right? How do we respond to them in the moment but be prepared? And with our kids and families, how do we make sure that when people walk in that they're entering into a safe space? So we're forward thinking and preparing more than just reacting. So picking up on that, Todd, going back to you, with safety and security, how have you worked with teams, with lay leaders, and even with staff to prepare them to respond to these types of things?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot of training, identifying, we found we've got a lot of talented folks in our congregation. We've got people who are EMTs, doctors, physicians, people who work in every branch of law enforcement. And so we lean on them to say, hey, what are you seeing? And what's best practices in your area, and how do we address those kind of things? And so we identify that. We've had the blessing to be able to say there's a person on each campus staff that sort of coordinates this overall arching safety and security plan. And then that person then takes the next step and recruits people and trains people. We take an approach that everybody's on our safety team. If you're a greeter, you're an usher, you're part of that team, because we can't be everywhere at once. Yeah. We've got security cameras up, of course, but the best thing is having people at entrances, first of all, greeting people, but also going, something's not right, or they're not, that person looks like they're not feeling well, or man, they're dressed weird. It's midsummer and they're coming in a trench coat. That's sort of weird, where why are they carrying so many bags? And usually most of the time it's just a normal thing, and someone's bringing somebody something. I had something I wanted you to have, and it's just such an easy thing. But it's just, how do we raise that awareness? And so it's just a lot of training. And I think our folks have gotten very accustomed to, about once a quarter, we say, hey, let's just walk over. Here are the 5 top things that we probably would encounter on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or whenever we're having an event. So how are we going to respond? And touching base with our worship leaders, like, hey, if there was somebody got ill during a service, how do we respond to that? And talking to our next gen staff, saying, hey, it looks like it's going to be stormy tonight. How are we going to? Are you guys ready? Is your room, your designated rooms for a tornado safe? And a lot of that stuff translates to lockdowns. If there was a safety threat as well. So it can be. It sounds overwhelming at first, but it's pretty simple stuff. It's just keep it in front of people. I think that's the hard part, is that you sort of have a plan, and then the tendency is to say, okay, we got a plan, but if you don't go over it, rehearse it, you're going to forget it. And so that it's just this ongoing training about once a quarter that we do. Yeah.
Well, and you think about, like, if you're on a small ministry team, like all that stuff you just talked about, it does seem overwhelming. But if you answer the questions on the front end, then you're not trying to respond in the moment, and it is actually less work. But it's that process of preparation and equipping so that people know how to respond and they feel confident in doing so.
Absolutely.
But that training and equipping is a big lift for any ministry area, but particularly when it comes to child safety and how do we protect our kids, how do we vet our leaders. So Linc, like we've always talked about background checks, that's been kind of the gold standard. Do you background check your ministry leaders? And that's probably been past 10, 15 years. But we realized in the past couple of years, there's got to be more. So walk us through that process of how we vet our leaders and really what we're training them and equipping them to do in the groups.
Yeah, so I've been doing ministry for several decades, and it's amazing how far we have come. Where I'm not saying we used to apologize to say we're going to do background checks. We need to email out. We need to let people know, hey, we're going to do this. And now it is just so standard that we don't apologize. Of course, it's the standard of how we vet has raised. The standard is so high. But we had an outside entity come in to look at our policies, and we had always thought we're doing pretty well. But I think what we were doing was comparing maybe what we had done in the past, maybe what some other churches may do or not do, and so we felt pretty good. But this outside entity kind of began to see some things, current policies, and really began to raise the bar on the strengthening of our policies of, in small groups and in leadership and adult ratio and so many things with our training. They provide a training that we have to do. And so the screening process really looks like anybody that wants to serve in a next-gen ministry space. If they work with under 18, they need to do an interview with the ministry heads of that ministry, or one of the ministers in that ministry. They need to fill out an application. They'll need to do an online training. It's about an hour. Everybody has to do that. They'll need to do background checks. And then we also have a lay vetting team that we started years ago. And so every team, every ministry has these ministry lay vetting teams that will meet with any new leader that wants to come in to be a student, small group leader, or children's or preschool, whatever that is. And they'll sit down for 30 to 45 minutes and just ask questions about hearing their story and their gift set and their history, what their passion is, and just get to know them. So it's more eyes on new folks coming in, but it's also a benefit to where it brings people in for new people that are coming in to kind of start building relationships.
Yeah.
So more eyes, as Todd said, as many eyes on it as possible. And so everybody that serves in our ministries has to be screened.
Yeah.
And what we have done is the percentage that has to do it is 100%. I mean, that's to be in compliance, you have to do that.
Yeah.
And we have to follow policies. I think years ago, maybe in churches, we try to do this, but for us, it is 100% compliance.
Yeah.
On so many of these. In fact, our eyes are always on the policies and how they actually take place, that we've had to strengthen even the language in our policy to bring clarity. So we're always looking at that to make it sharper and with our people. So everybody's trained. In fact, we do it on a 3-year cycle.
Yeah.
That everybody starts over every 3 years.
Yeah.
Background checks, to their training, to their vetting, and everybody has to do that. Once again, to raise the bar, raise the standard to make sure our kids are safe, our parents, leaders, and all the ministry safe, the ministries areas that we are a part of.
Yeah, and I think that when we're talking about these things, whether it's safety and security or protecting our kids, we always have to frame the why for our leaders. Because they're coming from a different ministry context. They may not know, like, hey, my last church, they got me in working with the kids the next week. Like, why can't I do that here? I want to use my gifts. But we don't want anything to distract from the gospel. We don't want something to take place at our churches that could hurt a kid, safety incident that could come up, and then it detracts from what God is doing in and through our church. And that's the way the enemy gets to us. So, like, follow-up question for you is, what do you say when a new leader comes in and they're like, man, this is a lot. Like, why do I have to do all this? I've been teaching Sunday school for 20 years.
Absolutely, and that happens all the time across our campuses, especially at the very beginning.
Yeah.
It was just like, how do we do ministry in this? And our response was, well, we're going to figure it out. because safety and security is the top. You know, if you were to ask a mom or dad that brings their child for the first time, they're looking around. First off, is this a safe and secure space? And so once again, that is a high mark that we want to have. But we've just had to learn to do it. You've just had to adjust, and we've had some leaders have a hard time with that. Maybe they waited for a while, they paused. Now it's I still care what they think, but at the same time, the expectation and the compliance is so high that this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I had some questions too as I began to look at the policies, and they're like, how do we do this?
Yeah.
How do you have relational ministry? Because that's what the church is. We want to do life together. We want to be in relationship and do life in small groups and sharing and all. How do you do that? And it's just it's interesting. The more we do it, the more we just figure out, for sure, not to get around the policies, but to work within them. So.
Don't you think, Linc, though, it's also for our first-time guests, Connection Ministry coming in, they're like, okay, they have a plan. And I feel, all right, here, and they were going to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And so it's almost the people who've been in church for a long time and like, why do we need to do this? Because we didn't have to do this in the past.
Yeah.
But for the new
We've been
people,
fine.
I mean, our church is focused on reaching those who don't know know Jesus, right? And so how do we make it so that there's no barriers? How do we remove those? And I think when you come into a church that has some good safety protocols and standards for our kids, hey, we didn't even know, here's the plan for, hey, if we have a fire alarm, this is where our kids will go, and this is where you will meet your kids, and we've got that figured out. Wait, really? I remember when we worked on that about 8 years ago, and the parents' response was, wow, this is great. Everybody else is like, okay, this is a lot of work, but hey, we have thought about this because we care about you. It's that important. So I think for the new people coming in, it's sort of relief, and it's probably just helping the folks that have been around for a while just to help them understand the reason why we're doing this.
Right, and in our next gen ministries, it's made up of either kids or students. It's made up of leaders who are adults, and it's made up of parents. So we've got to be considerate of all of those. Now, the parents in this absolutely love this. They see it. They're thankful. The leaders are the ones that have had to really adjust, but also our staff have adjusted. The kids just do life, and many of them are not having to make adjustments. But we at the same time, so here's what we've learned too, is we want kids to be in leadership too. And so if they're ages 13 to 17, we still want them to serve, but more of in a helping role. So that has been an adjustment. Before, we may have used them in certain leadership positions, but we've had to kind of adjust that. But even them, even a 13 to 17-year-old needs to go through the training, needs to go through some interviews. And so we still want to raise the bar for them too. That's been a big adjustment for that. So,
Well, I think that, again, you guys are picking up on themes where if you're listening to this podcast and you're tracking with us, there's got to be a consistent going back to the why. Why are we doing this? Explaining, the gospel is at stake here. We want to make sure that there are no other obstacles. So we are going to be intentional. That's the second word. I know for us, we do have people that are dedicated to this. Like, you guys have both spent considerable time on these things over the past few years, and that may not be the reality everywhere, but who do you bring alongside to help you to be intentional, to think through, where does somebody go if there's a fire alarm that's pulled? What do we do to vet our leaders? What's that checklist? How do we go over the top in being intentional to protect our people? So changing a little bit, Todd, I'd ask you, this is more of the practical element. If somebody comes to you at the Elevate conference and they're like, this is a lot. You guys are doing such a great job. I'm out here. We're a new church plant. How do I even get started? What would be the top 5 things from Todd that you would say?
I would say the first thing is just have a conversation about, do we have a plan? What would we do if, and there's usually like 5 categories of things you need to think about, and I think everyone always rushes to the most dramatic thing. You have a nurse in your church, that would be willing. That's their passion. That's their skill set. Involve them. Say, what do you see? Can you help us with this? And there may be a physician or someone else, but hey, I would say, let's work on a medical plan. That's the easy thing. Then it's sort of that weather threat. I mean, who is I bet you there's a guy in your church or a lady who loves to watch the Weather Channel and is a tornado spotter or something like that. It's like, would you be, and so you start curating a list of those people that just have some natural tendencies, and I bet you there's going to be a couple of guys or women that would love to talk about security and, how do we do that? And I think it's just come together and just, hey, let's talk about what we can do. And then we can provide resources in any community. To me, that's that would be the next step, is just reach out to your local law enforcement agency and say, hey, can you come and talk to us about what we need to do?
Yeah.
They'll even walk through your building and suggest, have you thought about this? Have you thought about, is this door open or is it locked all the time? And just things that you had never thought about. And we've just done that over the years.
Yeah.
We've talked to the Brentwood City, Spring Hill, Nashville police departments and said, hey, can you just give us some eyes on some things?
Yeah.
And they've just given us good. Be overwhelming, but just look for those people who are naturally asking those kind of questions anyway, and just say, hey, let's huddle up together and say, what would it look like? And it doesn't have to be a 45-page manual of safety procedures. That's overwhelming to anybody. We always try to say, can we put everything we need to do in a one-page document? And so we hand that out every time we have a training for our connections team. Here's the 5 things we're looking for. The thing we haven't talked about is like a lost child, or even a senior adult who has some memory issues and they get lost in the building.
Yeah.
We've had that happen. And so, hey, how are we going to handle that?
Yeah.
And you go, okay, this becomes easier. There's 5 categories. It's a fire, it's a weather, it's an active threat of some sort, and it's a lost child or a lost adult.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay. So I just think you have to break it down in small categories. So find that group of people that you already know that are bent that way, whether you're a church of 50 or 3,000. There are those people there already, and lean into them, and then reach out to the agencies in your city, in your community. They want to help because they don't want to have bad things happen in churches, and so they're gonna bend over backwards to work with you. I guarantee you that. And then you come up with a little plan, and then you can enhance it. I mean, we started with a small plan. We have a pretty elaborate plan now, even with our all of our safety protocols with our vetting of workers and things like that. But it started out small. And as we've grown, as we've learned, as we've watched others, we've figured out that we need to add to it and tweak it. So
well, and you kind of go back through that loop as you continue to grow, as you continue to have those conversations. People notice other things to be prepared for.
Absolutely,
we reach back out for help. I think it's that willingness to have the discussion, ask others for input, outside eyes, and then document it.
Absolutely.
And then you're equipping your people to be ready to respond.
Absolutely, just don't be afraid. It's just not a one and done thing.
Yeah.
It's just this continual growing. In this. So
that's good. That's good. Same thing for you, Linc. Like as somebody's starting off, it's a church plant. They're like, all right, we've got 2 rooms of kids right now. How do we even get started on this path of protecting and creating safe spaces?
I think it is back to what you said, the bigger why. You don't want to ever assume the stake in the ground. Those are the first things, is that we're going to create safe spaces. And then now you move forward. I think outside eyes are incredible to it, because it just kind of becomes, in a sense, white noise. We just see policies and we see things that we've always done, and we assume that it's good.
Yeah.
Because it may be better, like I said, than before. But get some outside eyes on it to begin to see it. And then when you don't shy away from the harder things. but when you begin to put things in place, one of the hardest things that we experienced is when we had these policies, and now we were going to start to unfold it, unveil the policies to everybody. And we had a date mm-hmm. that policies will start on this day. Nobody serves. So when we started to share the policies, that's the hardest time. That's when you begin to move it is the hardest resistance.
Yep.
But the more you do, you need a team. If it's just two of you, do not do it by yourself.
Yeah.
You need a team, and to build that team, because this is not Linc's policies. It's not the executive staff's policies. This is our policies as a church. And so you start moving and you start unfolding it and training and moving forward, but to put a date, say this is what we do. And what happens, what we begin to see, it builds into the culture, and now everybody's thinking, does this fit in line with our protocols?
Yeah.
And so everybody's doing it, and you got all these eyes on it. Now, yes, because we don't want to drift back, because we want to usually drift back to the easy things. So yes, there's a team obviously keeping an eye on things, but everybody begins to see it. And but that's the hardest thing is when you start. So just know that if whatever policies you want to put in place, you will have resistance.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to do the easier, convenient, comfortable thing.
Yeah.
And it's hard, and you will have questions. Just know they're coming. How do you do ministry in something like this?
Yeah.
And just know there is a church in Nashville that's doing it.
Yeah.
And others, and we're thriving.
Yeah.
You just have to flip the narrative on some things and how to do ministry.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, because that's regardless of size. I know somebody could probably listen to this and be like, well, y'all probably have 1,800 leaders ready to go. That's not the case. You're going to have people that push back, and there is going to be that tendency. I remember being a middle school ministry. You need to have a warm body in that room with those kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that tyranny of the urgent of I've got to have a leader, and you want to pull back on those standards because you've heard that pushback, and that guy's not going to lead that group because he doesn't want to go through the policies, and you want to run back, but you got to stick with it.
And we've had some hard adjustments. We've had some people kind of step away. Like I said, many of them have kind of come back because they want to serve, and they've seen, okay, it can be done. But yeah, you'll have some hard adjustments. But once again, the stake in the ground is this is who we are. And so you move forward and give it time and let people see, okay, this can be done.
Yeah.
But I think not assuming that the policies are good, not to assume that anybody, we want to minister to everybody, but we're not going to assume that everybody comes in with is not coming in with ill intent. We want to make sure everybody is vetted and everybody is seen, but also our policies are being followed in that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it always goes back here when we're talking about safety and security, child safety. Like we said, it's about the gospel. Part of our role as shepherds in this congregation is to protect the flock. We can't prepare for everything. We can't protect everybody from everything.
Right.
But as far as we are able, as much as we are able, we're going to do what we can to protect our people so that nothing distracts them from hearing the gospel. Well, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Elevate Podcast. I'd love for you to join us this September for our Elevate Conference at Brentwood Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. This is a one-day event created to encourage and equip your entire team. We'll have role-specific breakouts, inspiring keynotes, and networking with leaders from across the country. So go ahead and register at elevatechurchconference.com, and you can find the link today at the top of the show notes. Next week, join us as we talk about our groups and discipleship strategy, and check out the show notes for resources, links, and we hope to see you at the Elevate Conference on September 9th. Until next time.